The discharge papers were supposed to say Thursday. They said Tuesday instead. My cardiologist walked into the recovery room at Mercy Ridge Hospital, reviewed my blood work one final time, and told me that the stent procedure had gone better than anyone anticipated. My arteries were clear. My heart was beating with the steady rhythm of a man 15 years younger. He said I could go home 2 days early if I promised to rest. I told him I would rest better in my own bed. That was the truth. What I did not tell him was that I had been uneasy since the moment they wheeled me into the operating room. I had been carrying a low-grade, formless dread for 3 days, the kind that has no logical source but refuses to be dismissed. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school principal in Knoxville, Tennessee. I learned to trust my instincts about people a long time ago, and something in my gut had been pulling toward home with a gravity I could not explain. I called a cab from the hospital lobby. I did not call my daughter to pick me up. Later, I would understand exactly why that decision saved my wife's life. The cab pulled up our driveway at 4:40 in the afternoon. The house looked quiet from the outside. The blinds on the front windows were drawn, which was unusual. My wife, Dorothy, loved afternoon light. She had always said a dark house was a sad house. She had been saying that since the first year of our marriage, 41 years ago, and I had never once come home to find the blinds pulled against the sun. Not once. I paid the driver. I stood on the sidewalk with my overnight bag and looked at our house for a long moment. The neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. A sprinkler ticked in the yard across the road. Everything looked ordinary. Everything felt wrong. I walked to the front door and unlocked it. The air inside hit me first. It was stale and warm in a way that told me the air conditioning had not been running. In late September in Tennessee, that meant the house had been sitting closed and hot. The curtains were shut. The lights were off. On the kitchen counter, I could see a stack of takeout containers, at least a week's worth, not thrown away, just stacked in a greasy tower beside the sink. On the coffee table in the living room, there were 2 empty wine glasses and a half-finished bottle of red that nobody had bothered to cork. My daughter and her husband had been using our home as a vacation rental while I was in the hospital. I did not go to the kitchen. I did not look at the wine glasses. I walked straight to the hallway and to the bedroom where Dorothy had been sleeping since her Parkinson's diagnosis 18 months ago made the stairs too unreliable for her to manage safely. We had moved her to the first-floor guest room and converted it into a proper care suite. Hospital bed with adjustable rails, a medical cart with her medications, a call button mounted to the wall within reach of her right hand, a small camera I had installed in the corner near the ceiling, no larger than a smoke detector, so I could check on her from my phone when I was in another part of the house. The bedroom door was closed. There was no sound from inside. I put my hand on the doorknob. I turned it slowly, as if part of me was trying to delay what I was about to find. The door swung open. The smell reached me before anything else. It was thick and medicinal, with something underneath it that was sour and organic. The smell of a body that had been left to its own chemistry for too long. The room was dim. The curtains were closed here too. The ceiling fan was off. The temperature inside the room was easily 85 degrees. I found the light switch. Dorothy was in the bed. She was curled on her side, facing the wall, her knees drawn up, her silver hair tangled and damp against the back of her neck. She was wearing the same lavender nightgown she had been wearing when I kissed her goodbye 3 days ago. It had not been changed. The sheets beneath her were wrinkled and damp, and I could see immediately that they had not been changed either. I crossed the room in 3 steps. I leaned over the bed rail and put my hand on her shoulder. She flinched. It was a full-body flinch, a startled response so deep and immediate that it told me she had not been touched gently in days. She turned her head. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused for a moment, and then they found me, and the sound she made was not a word. It was a noise from somewhere beneath language, the sound a person makes when they have been waiting so long they have stopped believing anyone is coming. "Dorothy," I said. "I'm here. I'm right here." Her lips were cracked and peeling at the corners. The skin on the back of her hand, when I took it, stayed tented when I pressed it gently, a sign I recognized from 30 years of watching the school nurse work. Dehydration. Serious dehydration. I looked at the bedside table. There was a water bottle there, sealed, unopened, placed on the far corner of the table, just beyond the reach of her good hand. Her medications for the morning were still in the pill organizer, untouched. Her call button had been unplugged from the wall. The cord was coiled neatly on top of the medical cart, put away like something that was no longer needed. Someone had decided Dorothy did not need to call for help. I sat on the edge of the bed. I kept her hand in mine, and I breathed. I am a careful man. I have been in situations over the course of my career where the wrong response in the first 30 seconds determined everything that followed. A fight in the cafeteria, a parent threatening a student, a teacher who came to school drunk. I had learned young that rage is a luxury and clarity is a tool. I set my rage aside. I picked up clarity. I reached for my phone with my free hand and dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I spoke slowly and precisely. I gave our address. I said my wife had Parkinson's disease and had been left without care, without medication, and without adequate hydration for a period I estimated at 60 to 72 hours. I said she was conscious but severely disoriented. I said I needed an ambulance immediately. The dispatcher told me one was on the way. I did not hang up. I stayed on the line and I talked to Dorothy the entire time until I heard the sirens. Before the paramedics came through the door, I took my phone and opened the camera app. I photographed the sealed water bottle in the far corner of the table. I photographed the unplugged call button. I photographed the pill organizer with 3 days of untouched medication. I photographed the condition of the sheets. I photographed Dorothy's cracked lips and the redness on her hips, where the beginning of pressure sores had started to form. The timestamps on those photographs would matter later. I did not know exactly how much they would matter, but I took them anyway. The paramedics were efficient and kind. The lead paramedic, a young woman with serious eyes, took one look at the situation and started an IV line within 90 seconds. She did not ask me leading questions in front of Dorothy. She waited until her partner had stabilized my wife and was preparing the stretcher before she stepped to the doorway and spoke to me quietly. "How long has she been like this?" she asked. I told her I had been in the hospital myself since Friday. I told her my daughter and son-in-law had been staying at the house to provide care. I told her I did not know exactly when they had last checked on her. The paramedic looked at me. She looked at the room. She looked back at me. "We are going to need to report this to Adult Protective Services," she said. "I want you to know that up front." "Good," I said. "Please do. Document everything you see." She held my gaze for a moment, and I think she understood then that she was not dealing with a confused or overwhelmed family member. She was dealing with a man who had already made up his mind about what happened next. In the ambulance, riding beside Dorothy as the IV worked and her color slowly began to return, I sent a text to my daughter. I kept it simple. I said I had been discharged early and was at the house, that I had found her mother in distress, and that we were on our way to Mercy Ridge. I said she should come to the hospital. The reply came 4 minutes later. "Oh my God, Dad, we had to step out for just a little while. We were only gone a few hours. I promise she was fine when we left. We're on our way." A few hours. I looked at the sealed water bottle in the evidence photograph on my phone. I looked at the untouched Thursday morning medications. I looked at the pressure sores that do not form in a few hours. I put my phone in my pocket. I did not reply. At the hospital, the emergency physician reviewed Dorothy's blood work and came to find me in the family waiting area with the expression of a man who was choosing his words carefully. He told me her sodium levels were critically elevated, consistent with 2 to 3 days of severely inadequate fluid intake. He told me her blood pressure had been dangerously low on arrival. He told me she had developed a urinary tract infection that, given her Parkinson's medication schedule being disrupted, had likely been progressing for more than 48 hours. He told me she was stable now, but that she had been perhaps 12 hours from a crisis that might have been irreversible. He paused. He said the nursing staff had observed bruising on Dorothy's left forearm that did not appear consistent with a fall. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "Document it. All of it. I want photographs in the medical record. I want a formal notation that this case has been referred to Adult Protective Services, and I would like to speak to whoever is on duty from your social work team." The doctor nodded. He said, "Mr. Calloway, I want you to know that we take situations like this very seriously." "I know you do," I said. "So do I." My daughter and her husband arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later. I watched them come through the automatic doors. My daughter was wearing a sundress and sandals. Her husband was in shorts and a polo shirt. They were tan. Whatever few hours errand they claimed to have been running, they had been running it somewhere with a pool and sunshine. My daughter's hair was still slightly damp at the ends. She spotted me and rushed across the waiting room with her arms extended and a face arranged into the architecture of devastation. "Dad, oh my God," she said. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. We were only gone for a little while. She was sleeping when we left. I swear she was fine." Her husband came to stand beside her. He put his hand on her back in a gesture of support. He looked at me with eyes that were doing rapid calculations. "Where were you?" I asked. My voice was level. I had spent 3 days flat on my back in a hospital bed, and my voice was perfectly level. My daughter blinked. "We told you." We stepped out. We needed groceries, and I needed to drop something off at the office, and it just took longer than we expected. "You needed groceries," I said. I looked at her husband. He glanced at his wife, then back at me. "Dad," her husband said, using that word with a familiarity that had always felt slightly wrong to me, "we feel terrible about this, really. But your wife was stable when we left. She had taken her evening medications, and she was resting comfortably. Whatever happened after that, we can't be responsible for every hour of every day. We're not professional caregivers." I had hired a professional caregiver. Specifically, I had hired a professional caregiver 18 months ago when Dorothy's Parkinson's progressed to the point where she needed supervised daily assistance. A licensed home health aide from Compass Care Services, paid on a monthly basis, 40 hours a week. I had arranged the contract, signed the paperwork, and set up the automatic payment. The aide's name was Gloria, and Gloria had been coming to our house 5 days a week without a single missed visit for over a year. Or so I had believed. I looked at my daughter. I looked at her husband. "Where is Gloria?" I asked. Something moved behind my daughter's eyes. It was quick, and she recovered fast, but I saw it. "We decided to let Gloria go a few months ago," she said. "Mom had gotten so comfortable with me being around, and we thought it made more sense financially to just handle things ourselves, since I was working from home anyway. We told you about this, Dad. We talked about it when you were planning the hospital stay. You agreed it was fine. I had agreed to no such thing. I would have remembered. I remember everything connected to Dorothy's care. I kept a notebook. I reviewed it every week. There was no conversation about dismissing Gloria." "I see," I said. My daughter touched my arm. "We're going to get through this," she said. "Mom is going to be okay, and we are going to figure out a better system going forward. I know you're upset, but you just had heart surgery, and you need to rest. Let us handle things from here." I looked at her hand on my arm. I nodded slowly. I let my shoulders drop. I put a slight tremor into my voice that was not entirely false, because after 3 days of surgery and recovery and now this, some part of me was genuinely shaking. "You're right," I said. "I'm exhausted. I can barely think straight. Can you just make sure the nurses know to call you if anything changes tonight? I need to go back to the house and sleep." My daughter's face flooded with relief. She wrapped her arms around me. "Of course," she said. "Of course, Dad. You go rest. We'll be right here." Her husband shook my hand. "You did the right thing getting her here fast," he said. "You're a good man." I walked out of the hospital and sat in my car in the parking structure for 11 minutes. I sat completely still with my hands in my lap, and I let myself feel, completely and without restraint, every molecule of what I was feeling. I gave myself 11 minutes because that was all I could afford. Then I started the car and drove home. I want to tell you what I found over the next several hours, because the story I am about to tell you did not end in that hospital waiting room. It ended in a way I am still, 6 months later, processing completely. But before the ending came the work, and the work was methodical and cold and necessary. I went directly to my home office and sat down at my computer. I am not a technophobe. I built my career in an era of paper and chalk, but I retired in an era of digital records, and I adapted. 3 years ago, after a stranger broke into our garage, I installed a home security system. Not the kind you see advertised on television, the kind a retired principal with a methodical mind installs after spending an afternoon researching options. It had cameras at the front door, back door, garage, and one I had mounted myself in the corner of Dorothy's care suite, disguised inside a small decorative clock. The footage uploaded automatically to a cloud server every 24 hours. I had never once looked at the backup footage because I had never needed to. I logged into the cloud server and navigated to the footage from Dorothy's room. I went back 4 months, which was approximately when my daughter had told me Gloria had been dismissed. What I watched over the next 2 hours, fast-forwarding, pausing, rewinding, destroyed the last remaining structure of what I had believed my family to be. Gloria had not been dismissed 4 months ago. The footage showed Gloria arriving on a Monday morning in late May, professional and punctual, her equipment bag over her shoulder. Then it showed my daughter meeting her at the door. There was no audio at that distance, but the body language was clear. My daughter had a piece of paper in her hand. Gloria looked at it. Gloria shook her head. My daughter crossed her arms. Gloria looked at the paper again, then at my daughter, then at the ground. She picked up her bag. She walked to her car and drove away. My daughter went back inside. Gloria had not quit. She had been terminated at the door. For 4 months, I had been writing a monthly check made out to cash, which my daughter had offered to hand-deliver to the agency because, she said, it was easier than dealing with the mailing address. I had handed her those checks without question. I trusted my daughter. I had trusted my daughter the way a man trusts the floor beneath his feet, without thinking about it, because the alternative was unthinkable. I thought about it now. 4 months multiplied by the monthly care fee. I opened my banking app and stared at the transfer history. The checks had been cashed. Every single one. I kept watching the footage. What I saw in the months that followed Gloria's dismissal was not active cruelty every day. It was something arguably worse because it was careless. My daughter checked on Dorothy in the mornings, when it was convenient. Sometimes she stayed for 20 minutes. Sometimes she stayed for 5. Some days the footage showed Dorothy's door not opening at all until afternoon. I watched my wife press the call button on her wall repeatedly one afternoon in July, pressing it again and again while the footage timestamp ticked forward 45 minutes before anyone appeared. I watched my son-in-law come to the doorway once in August, look at Dorothy, say something I could not hear, and leave without doing anything at all. And then there was last week. The footage from the day before my hospitalization showed my daughter in the room, going through the top drawer of Dorothy's dresser. She did not look like she was looking for something specific. She looked like she was inventorying. She held up Dorothy's pearl earrings. She held up a small brooch. She held them up to the light and looked at them the way a person looks at something they are planning to sell. I closed the laptop. I sat in my office in the quiet house and I thought for a long time about what kind of man I intended to be in the next 48 hours. I could call my daughter right now. I could confront her. I could scream every truth I had just discovered directly into her face. I had enough anger to power that conversation for hours. But I had also spent 31 years watching young people make the mistake of acting on emotion before gathering everything they needed. I had seen students throw a punch and lose the argument. I had seen parents threaten lawyers and end up settling for nothing. The person who strikes first almost always loses ground to the person who waits. I needed 2 things before I moved. I needed a lawyer, and I needed the complete picture of what had been done to my finances. I called Arthur Mendez at 7 in the morning. Arthur had been my personal attorney for 16 years. He is not the kind of lawyer who plays golf with judges and sends holiday cards to the courthouse clerks. He is the kind of lawyer who reads every document 3 times and wins by knowing things other people's lawyers have not thought to look for. He answered on the 3rd ring, and I told him everything. I told him about the hospital discharge and coming home early. I told him about Dorothy's condition. I told him about the footage. I told him about the checks. He did not speak for a long moment after I finished. Then he said, "Do not touch the financial accounts yet. Do not confront anyone yet. Get me a copy of everything on that cloud server and meet me at my office at 9. I was at his office at 8:45. What Arthur found over the next several hours would have been impressive if it had not been criminal. My daughter and her husband had used the 3 months of care payments, which added up to more than $12,000, to make a series of purchases that were clearly documented in the credit card statements Arthur pulled. A new laptop, a weekend at a resort in Asheville, 2 car payments on a lease my daughter had signed in June for a vehicle I had never seen in their driveway because, I now understood, they kept it at a separate address I did not know about. And there was something else. 6 weeks ago, my son-in-law had visited the office of our county clerk. Arthur had a contact there who confirmed this by end of day. My son-in-law had requested copies of the deed to my property and the titles to my 2 vehicles. He had also requested, though not yet received, documentation on the process for petitioning for emergency guardianship of an adult with a degenerative neurological condition. He had been researching how to take legal control of my wife. Arthur folded his hands on the desk and looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses. "Gerald," he said, using my name in the careful way he does when he wants me to hear the full weight of what follows. "What they have done constitutes elder financial abuse and criminal neglect. The footage alone is sufficient to bring charges. The financial documentation makes it worse. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." He asked me whether I wanted to involve the police immediately, or whether I wanted to give them an opportunity to expose the full scope of what they had planned. I thought about my son-in-law requesting guardianship paperwork. I thought about my daughter holding Dorothy's pearls up to the light. I thought about the unsigned documents that were presumably still coming. I told Arthur I wanted to give them enough rope. Arthur nodded like a man who had been waiting for exactly that answer. He made 2 phone calls. The first was to a detective at the Knox County Sheriff's Office, named Holt, who Arthur said was experienced in elder abuse cases and could be trusted to handle the situation with discretion. The second call was to Compass Care Services, to confirm in writing that Gloria had not resigned voluntarily and that the termination had been initiated by a family member without the primary account holder's knowledge or authorization. The director at Compass was prepared to provide a sworn affidavit. I went back to the hospital in the afternoon. Dorothy was significantly more alert. The IV fluids had worked through her system, and the antibiotics were clearing the infection. She was sitting up slightly when I entered the room, and when she saw me, she extended her good hand immediately. I sat in the chair beside her bed and held it, and we stayed like that for a long time without speaking, because some things are communicated more accurately without words. My daughter and her husband were in the family lounge. They had, apparently, been at the hospital for several hours, presenting themselves as devoted family members to the nursing staff. My daughter had brought flowers. Her husband had spoken to the charge nurse twice. They were building a record of concern. I went to find them. I sat down across from my daughter, and I made myself look tired and frightened, which was not entirely a performance. I told her the doctor said Dorothy's recovery would require more intensive support going forward. I told her I was worried about being able to manage everything while I was still recovering from my own procedure. I said I was thinking maybe it was time to talk about more formal arrangements for the house and for Dorothy's care, and that I might need help understanding all the legal and financial pieces because it was too much for me to handle, alone right now. I watched my daughter's face. I watched her become very still in the way that predators become still. "We've been thinking about exactly that," she said carefully. Her husband leaned forward. "We actually have some ideas," he said. "Some things we've been putting together that might make everything simpler for everyone. Would you be open to sitting down and going over some options with us?" "Of course," I said. "Whatever makes sense. I just want Dorothy to be taken care of, and I want to stop worrying." My daughter reached over and patted my hand. "That is exactly what we want too, Dad," she said. They came to the house 2 days later with a document that her husband introduced as a care management agreement. It was not drafted by a real estate attorney or an elder law specialist. It had been put together by a legal document preparation service, the kind that charges $150 to arrange template language that carries the superficial appearance of legitimacy. I could tell because the font was inconsistent, and 2 of the clause numbers were repeated. The document proposed that my daughter and her husband be appointed as joint financial managers for the household accounts, with authority to make decisions regarding real property, medical care directives, and asset liquidation in the event that I or Dorothy were deemed unable to manage our own affairs. It defined unable in language so vague that a competent attorney could have applied it to someone who forgot where they put their car keys. It also included a clause that would give them access to the home equity line of credit I had paid off 4 years ago. My son-in-law explained the document with the smooth confidence of a man who had rehearsed the presentation. "It's really just about protecting you both," he said, "making sure that if something happens to you medically, given your recent heart situation, the bills get paid and Dorothy's care doesn't fall through any cracks. You've seen how easily things can go sideways." He let the implication of that sit between us. He was threatening me with the same crisis he had helped create. I held the document. I turned the pages slowly. I asked questions that sounded like the questions of a man who was not entirely following the legal language. I asked what this part meant. I asked whether this gave them permission to sell the house if they decided to. My son-in-law said it was just standard protective language and that nothing would happen without discussion. My daughter said, "We are family, Dad. Nobody is trying to take anything from you." I picked up the pen they had placed on the kitchen table. I pretended to read the signature line. I asked if I needed a notary, and my son-in-law said he had brought a stamp, pulling it from his briefcase with the practiced ease of someone who had thought of everything. What he had not thought of was that the notary stamp he produced was registered to a business address that had been dissolved 14 months ago. I had asked Arthur to verify it the night before. I signed my name. I signed it as Gerald Thomas Calloway, which is not my legal name. My legal name is Gerald T. Calloway, and the T does not stand for Thomas. It stands for nothing, because it is an initial, my mother added because she liked the symmetry, and there is no middle name behind it, a fact that has exactly one entry in one county record that my son-in-law had never thought to look for. I also wrote the wrong date, not the wrong year, the wrong month. I wrote August instead of October. In a document witnessed by an invalid notary and signed with a legally incorrect name on the wrong date, I had produced 45 minutes of false confidence for two people who had earned something far colder. They left the house, visibly relieved. I stood at the kitchen window and watched their car back out of the driveway, and I felt the same cold clarity I had felt in the ambulance beside my wife. The ground was prepared. The trap was set. All that remained was to let it close. I called Detective Holt that evening. I told him we were ready. "Here is what I want you to understand about the night that followed. I did not plan it as revenge. Revenge is what someone seeks when they feel powerless and need the sensation of power back. What I felt was not powerless. I felt precise. What I had spent the previous 4 days building was not a trap for my emotions. It was a legal mechanism, constructed with Arthur's guidance, to ensure that what my daughter and her husband had done would follow them in a way they could not walk away from. I had built a case. I had gathered evidence. I had documented every thread. What happened that night was the mechanism completing its function. I asked my daughter to come to the house the following Saturday afternoon, telling her I wanted to go over some questions about the document before I had it officially processed. I told her to bring her husband. I told her I had also invited my neighbor, a retired judge named Franklin, who had been a family friend for 20 years, just to have someone familiar present because I was still feeling anxious. Franklin was there when they arrived. He was sitting in the living room with Arthur Mendez. My daughter walked through the door, and her eyes moved across the room, and she saw the two men sitting there, and I watched her recalibrate instantly, pulling a smile across her face like a curtain. She said it was so nice to see Franklin. She said she had not realized this was going to be a whole gathering. I asked her to sit down. "I want to tell you what this room looked like. The television on the wall above the fireplace, the same television my son-in-law had watched football games on during his visits, was connected to my laptop. On the coffee table was a printed copy of the Compass Care Services affidavit. Beside it was a printout of the bank transfer history for the previous 4 months. Beside that was a copy of the cloud server footage log, time-stamped, organized, each incident noted in Arthur's precise handwriting. My daughter looked at the papers on the table. She looked at Arthur. She looked at me. "What's going on?" she said. "I have something I would like to show you," I said. I pressed play on the laptop and the television screen filled with security footage. The date stamp in the corner read the last Monday in May. The footage showed Gloria arriving at our front door with her equipment bag. It showed my daughter meeting her with a piece of paper. It showed Gloria reading the paper and shaking her head. It showed my daughter's arms crossing. It showed Gloria walking back to her car. My daughter made a sound. I let the footage continue. I did not speak. I let the room watch 2 months of what my wife's care had actually looked like in the hands of people who had collected $12,000 to provide it. I let the footage show the afternoon Dorothy pressed the call button 45 minutes without anyone coming. I let it show my son-in-law in the doorway of her room, looking at her, leaving without touching anything. When the footage reached the morning, my daughter had stood at Dorothy's dresser, holding her pearls up to the light. My son-in-law pushed back from the table. "That's not what it looks like," he said. "Tell me what it looks like," Arthur said. My daughter's face had gone the gray color of old concrete. She looked at me with something I can only describe as the face of a person who has just discovered that the foundation they were standing on was made of something other than what they believed. She had believed, I think, that I was an old man with a compromised heart who was grateful for any help and too tired to look closely at what that help actually consisted of. She had never once considered that I might be paying attention. "Dad," she said. Her voice cracked on the word. "Dad, please." I can explain. I did not raise my voice. I had not raised my voice in 4 days, and I was not going to raise it now. I said, "Your mother could not reach her water for 3 days. Her call button was unplugged. Her medications were untouched. The doctor told me she was 12 hours from irreversible damage. You collected $12,000 and let your mother nearly die, and used the money to lease a car." My son-in-law stood up. He pointed at Arthur. "This is a setup. You can't use that footage. There's privacy laws. We're family. You are welcome to consult an attorney about what footage is admissible," Arthur said, without looking up from the table. "In the meantime, I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit 3, which covers the financial transfers, and Exhibit 4, which is a sworn affidavit from Compass Care Services confirming that their employee was wrongfully terminated without the account holder's knowledge." My son-in-law looked at the door. I want to be clear. I did not stand in the way of the door. I did not threaten him. I simply said, "Detective Holt is outside." My son-in-law sat back down. The conversation that followed was not dramatic in the way of movies or the way people sometimes imagine confrontations should be. It was quiet and methodical. Arthur spoke mostly. He explained what had been documented. He explained what charges the Knox County Sheriff's Office had confirmed were supportable based on the evidence presented. He explained the fraudulent document my son-in-law had prepared, and the invalid notary, and the incorrect legal name, and I watched my son-in-law's face as he processed the fact that the signature he had been carrying around in his briefcase as his winning hand was legally worthless in 4 separate ways. My daughter looked at me once during all of this. Just once. She did not say she was sorry. I do not think she was sorry yet. I think she was calculating, the same way she had been calculating since this began, trying to find the angle that allowed her to walk out of this room with the least damage. But there was no angle. Arthur had made sure of that. Detective Holt came inside when Arthur opened the door for him. The detective was a quiet man, with the manner of someone who has heard every version of every excuse and finds none of them particularly interesting. He looked at the documentation on the table. He looked at my daughter and her husband. He asked them each to state their names and confirm their current address. My daughter asked if she needed a lawyer. Detective Holt said that was entirely her choice to make. She was arrested on charges of elder financial exploitation and criminal neglect of a vulnerable adult. Her husband was arrested on the same charges, plus 1 count of fraud for the document preparation. They were handcuffed in my living room in front of Franklin, who said nothing, and Arthur, who was already making notes for the civil proceedings that would follow. I watched the detective lead them out to his car. I stood on the front porch. My daughter looked back at me once from the driveway. I do not know what she was hoping to see on my face. Whatever it was, I do not think she found it. I closed the front door. I went to the kitchen and sat down at the table in the quiet house, and I stayed there for a long time. Outside, a neighbor walked a dog past the house. The afternoon light shifted. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a kid was shooting baskets in a driveway. I thought about my daughter at 6 years old, sitting at this same kitchen table doing homework. I thought about dropping her at college on a Sunday in August and driving home alone for the first time. I thought about the morning she called to tell me she was engaged and how proud I had been of the woman she had become, or the woman I believed she had become. I let myself feel all of that because the person I have tried to be my whole life is a person who does not pretend away difficult things. Dorothy would not have wanted me to pretend away difficult things. Dorothy always said that the only way out is through. I picked up my phone and called the hospital to check on Dorothy's progress. The plea agreements came 5 months later. My daughter accepted a sentence of 4 years with the possibility of parole after 2.5, plus mandatory repayment of the full financial damages plus interest. Her husband received 5 years. Neither of them has contacted me since the day of the arrest, and I do not expect them to. Some doors, once you understand what is on the other side, you stop wanting to open. Dorothy came home to the house in November. I had spent the weeks before her return making changes. A proper ramp at the front entrance, wider door frames in the hallway. A new care suite with everything positioned correctly, all of it within reach of both hands, call buttons at 3 heights. Nothing placed decoratively, everything placed usefully. Gloria came back. She started on a Monday morning, parking in the same spot she had always used, carrying her equipment bag through the same door. She hugged Dorothy for a long moment before they started the day's routine. I stood in the kitchen and made coffee and listened to them talking in the next room, and I thought about what it means to be reliable, to be the person who shows up, to be trustworthy in the most literal and unglamorous sense of that word. I am 67 years old. I have spent my life trying to help young people understand that character is not what you present to the world. It is what you do when no one is watching. I learned this year that I had failed to teach it to the person who mattered most. But I also learned something else. I learned that protecting the people you love is not passive. It is not enough to earn the money and provide the comfort and trust that the people around you share your values. Protection is a practice. It is attentive and suspicious, and willing to look closely at uncomfortable things. It is willing to pull the thread even when you are afraid of what might unravel. On a Tuesday afternoon in early December, Dorothy and I sat on the back porch in the thin winter sunlight. She had a cup of tea. I had coffee. The yard was bare, and the sky was that pale gray blue it gets in Tennessee in December, and the light was very quiet, and there was nothing I needed to do in that moment except sit beside her. She put her hand on the armrest between us, and I covered it with mine. She said one word. She said it carefully, the way she says everything now, choosing each syllable. "Stay," she said. "I am not going anywhere," I told her. "I am right here. I will keep being right here." She looked out at the yard. She nodded once. She drank her tea. If you are watching this because something about this story landed close to home, because you have parents who are getting older, or because you are getting older yourself, and you feel the edges of your world beginning to depend on people you have not fully tested, I want to say this plainly. Check. Look. Ask the questions that feel uncomfortable to ask. The person who would be hurt by your attention is not the person you want in charge of your life. Real love does not wilt under scrutiny. It holds up to it. Hit like if this story stayed with you. Subscribe to Eclipse Vengeance for more stories about ordinary people who refuse to be beaten. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done differently? And could you have forgiven your own child? Because I am still working on that answer. And I suspect I always will be.